pretty large group of folks calling in today to hear about the water research priorities that we have been putting together over this summer. So I am Kendra Kaiser. I am the director of the Idaho Water Resources Research Institute, or IWRRI, and we are housed at the University of Idaho. I'm down here in Boise, and our assistant director, Meg Wolf, is in North Idaho in Coeur d'Alene, and we're also joined by Lindsay Beecham, our communications manager. So today we are going to be sharing with you all an overview of the process by which we came up with the water research priorities for this year, and then the details on those priorities and some of the next steps that we have planned out over this upcoming year. The meeting is being recorded and is also going to be available on our website, which we will be distributing as well through our newsletter later this week. So just to provide a little bit of background for those of you that are not familiar, IWRRI was established through the Water Resources Research Act program. So there are 54 water research institutes in every state and territory, and we were established in 1964. And the role of the water research institutes are to plan, facilitate, and conduct research that's relevant for state and regional water problems. Additionally, our role is to promote technology transfer of this information and disseminate the research results broadly, while also training scientists through participation in research and then distributing competitive grants that are funded through the USGS. So our objective as an institute is to coordinate a visionary, interdisciplinary, and partner-driven set of water research for the priorities for the state of Idaho that is implemented across institutions. And so to do that, we are looking to build relationships and become a hub that really connects stakeholders, students, and researchers. So you can see here on the map that U of I staff and IWRRI staff are distributed across the state. And then we also have highlighted Boise State and Idaho State as well as key partners in delivering this objective. So this past year, we're really excited for input and support from our legislature in passing the Prioritizing Water Research in Idaho Higher Education legislation. And in this legislation, they allocated $1 million for us to distribute to accomplish research priorities at the direction of our executive board. And in this legislation, they've highlighted that IWRRI is to encourage rigorous, actionable water research at all of our public institutions of higher learning, and will fund research accordingly. And so a big component of this process that we've been going through this past summer is to fulfill this objective of funding research that's of relevance to the state. And so the process that we went about to do this was, number one, to highlight our goals, or to identify the most pressing water challenges and research needs across the state, and then generate and vet a wide array of project proposals from partners and stakeholders, and then evaluate those projects based on the relevance, the community impact that they will provide, feasibility, viability, and then making sure that we have representation from across the state. Additionally, we're looking to figure out how can we prioritize projects for this specific year while also identifying longer-term ideas and project needs. And so, this first year, given that it's our first year of getting funding from the legislature, we're really looking to identify high-impact research that can get done in time for us to report back to folks in this upcoming year. And additionally, this research prioritization process is to provide clear direction to our executive board for allocation of this funding from the state. So our research advisory committee, it has 32 members, and they are a really wide range of members. We have folks that are at state and federal agencies, tribal governments, all three of the universities, utilities and municipal governments, conservation organizations, and representatives from industry as well. And you can see from this figure that we have representatives from across the state. So about a third of our members are serving in roles where they are serving the entire state. And then, about 10 to 15% of each of the members then represent any of the other regions. So our big picture process for how we engage the Research Advisory Committee was in our first meeting, these are all held online to make it easier for people to connect, is that we discussed the water resource challenges across the state of Idaho. And afterwards, the RAC members submitted projects that kind of addressed those challenges and met the needs of the stakeholders or groups that they were representing. We also, Meg and I have spent the past year talking with lots of different stakeholders and partners across the state and learning about water research needs. And so we also submitted those research needs on behalf of those partners. And then in meeting 2, we reviewed all of these projects that were submitted, and we characterized all of the projects that were submitted by the USGS Water Resources Research Act priority areas. So these priority areas are like pretty broad groupings, but we have water scarcity and availability, water quality, technology and innovation, water hazards, and then water policy management and planning, water literacy and workforce development, and ecosystems. And so by grouping the projects that are occurring here in Idaho by these USGS priority areas, it helps us align with the broader national efforts that are going on. And then we also characterize them based on the regions that are identified by the Idaho Water Resources Board. So the figure on the right with the map of Idaho shows the northern region in orange, the southwest region in green. Central part of the state kind of goes from, south central all the way up to Lemhi County, and then the eastern part of the state. And then after we had, discussions in this meeting, all of the participants of the RAC voted on which projects they thought were the biggest priority in each of the categories provided by the USGS. And then in our third meeting, we reviewed the results, kind of discussed overlap between different projects and opportunities for integrating different ideas. And then just yesterday, we brought this list to our executive board, and they provided input as well. So first, I want to start with the big picture Idaho water resource challenges that were identified in the meetings with the RAC. So water supply is most certainly one of our biggest challenges and topics of concern across the state, namely groundwater declines in particular, which are occurring across the state, and they're complicated by complex surface water and groundwater interactions that require additional research and data collection. Additionally, we have observed that there are changes in water supply from headwater catchments that are supplying our downstream communities, and it's necessary for us to understand how those changes are occurring so that we can plan for the future. And then additionally, on the water supply side of things, we've heard a lot of different concerns and interest around community needs regarding reservoir management. And so there's a lot of topics around how can we adapt our current reservoir management plans to better meet the needs of local communities. On the water quality side of things, there are a myriad of challenges that are stemming from, growth of septic systems in rural areas and agricultural impacts on both surface water bodies and groundwater resources. This is of particular concern for places where this water is being used for drinking water. As many of us know, eutrophication and harmful algal blooms are emerging concerns for water bodies across the state, which can also impact drinking water sources, recreation, and ecological systems. And then there have been a lot of conversations around water reuse in the past couple of years, in part to mitigate some of our water supply concerns. And so evaluating what the standards are that are needed to support aquifer recharge while protecting groundwater quality has been a really a big topic of concern. And then one of the other groups of topics that we created was around just water data. It was made clear by various RAC members that there are quite a few needs regarding water data interoperability and accessibility across various agencies and organizations. And there are some needs on creating tools and visualizations that can serve decision makers and kind of make our research findings more transparent to the public. We know that we don't have the necessary spatial coverage of key observational data, including weather, soil moisture, and snow data. And they're, a broad challenge that will likely always be the case, but water modeling tools that are used for regulatory purposes have a range of limitations. And some of the available tools that we do use aren't really accessible to non-technical users and decision makers. And so there's a big challenge on how do we communicate the uncertainty in models? How do we improve models where it's most important to make the biggest impact on water management decisions? And then the other big area around water challenges is around growth. Many of us are seeing rapid residential development in whichever part of the state that we're in, and this is of particular concern in sensitive aquifers, and it can pose challenges for both water quality and long-term water supply. Additionally, as communities are growing, individual wells and septic systems can result in fragmented management and perhaps more challenging oversight to protect water quality. And it creates a lot of regulatory challenges for both cities that have their own systems and new developments as well. There's a new report about this next challenge from the McClure Center, namely that rural communities need a lot of additional resources to maintain and upgrade water infrastructure to keep pace with the development that they are seeing, as well as aging infrastructure. And then on top of that, their decision makers don't really have consistent access to tools that would be useful for them to quantify and evaluate the impact of growth as it's happening. And then on the ecosystem sides, we all know about the quagga mussel and the impacts that it's having in southern Idaho. And so a challenge is going to be to continue to be able to be adaptive and rapidly deploy solutions to the new invasive species to both protect Idaho ecosystems, native species, and our infrastructure in the case of quagga mussel. And one of the other challenges that's kind of interesting to think about is that both understanding and prioritizing beneficial outcomes for aquatic ecosystems is challenging to do because all of the different agencies and organizations have divergent missions and objectives. And so figuring out how to prioritize that amidst all these other objectives is challenging. On the education side of things, any water professional that you talk to will say that we wish more people were educated about water resources in Idaho and that our communities would benefit from increased understanding of water issues and their own role in sustainable water management. And then another really big challenge is that workforce readiness is a key need, particularly for our state agencies and organizations that need technical expertise to solve a lot of these complex issues. All right, so with that, we're going to shift over into a summary of all the different projects that we heard about this past year to meet these Idaho water resources challenges. So the submissions from this past year there were over 90 of them from across the state. The biggest bucket of submissions were regarding water scarcity and availability, which perhaps might not be surprising, but the magnitude of how many more topics were submitted there was actually quite surprising to me. Beyond that, the group that was next is technology and innovation. For context, we put a lot of remote sensing projects, big new data projects in technology and innovation, and then followed by water quality, policy and planning, ecosystems, literacy, and then hazards and climate. And these projects, some of the other things that was quite interesting about these projects is that while there were quite a few projects for each individual region that you can see here in the graph, the majority of projects were actually relevant for the entire state of Idaho, which I think is really exciting for this upcoming year of funding research priorities, because any of those projects that are relevant for the state of Idaho will have a big impact all across the state. And beyond there was a lot of submissions from North Idaho, which is really exciting for me to see, from Southern Idaho to learn more about the needs up north. And then the rest were relatively distributed across Southern Idaho. So as we went through this process, a big part of it was trying to figure out how do we actually prioritize the different projects that were submitted. And so the first component or bucket was really related to feasibility, timeliness, and impact. And so feasibility meaning, is it a project that would actually take 5 or 10 years? And if so, what would be the 1 year, first step approach to tackling a really complex problem? And then the impact. So, even though we want to have these regional representation of different regional projects, like could the outcome of a regional project be scalable or relevant to another community beyond perhaps just your own back door? And then from there, one of the things that was interesting to do is that we spent quite a bit of time to combine research projects that were really closely aligned or even dependent on each other. And so, for example, you'll see as I go through some of the research projects that we have some topics that are grouping related high-ranking projects. And we combined, the votes from our research advisory committee across those. Um, and like I mentioned before, we're trying to get a representation of the entire state in this upcoming year of funding and focus. But conveniently, the majority of projects are actually relevant statewide, but we do have at least one project or topic within each specific region. All right, so this figure is just a really high level, and I'm going to get into the details of a lot of these projects next. But on the left-hand side, we have the list of projects that are relevant for the entire state. And so in those statewide projects, we have a topic in each of the USGS water research priorities. And then over on the right with the map of Idaho, we are showing which topics were voted as the highest priority in each of the regions. And so you can see up north, there's interest in understanding adaptive reservoir management and pond array, as well as modeling the frequency of high flows under future climate in flood-prone communities in kind of the southern part of the Northern District. And then down south, perhaps unsurprisingly, a lot of the focus was on water scarcity topics regarding water budgets and water supply. And then one of the technology and innovation projects was really focused on quantifying incidental recharge from canals to improve our water budget estimates there, which is relevant for all of southern Idaho. All right, so now we'll dig into the details. So the elephant in the room always is the East Snake Plain. And unsurprisingly, we have quite a few water budget topics focused on the East Snake Plain. So the primary one that got a lot of attention from our committee as well as support from the executive board is doing a water budget gap analysis for the East Snake Plain. And so this project would review the available data sources.
Just a pause. Your screen is shifted a little bit, so the slide isn't centered anymore.
Oh, interesting.
So I don't know if you can recenter.
Did that do anything?
That's better.
Okay. And also that's great pause to remind, if you have any questions, there's a Q&A box, and folks, you can put questions in as I go through the presentation, and then Meg will help us go through those at the end. Thanks, Meg.
Yeah.
So the water budget gap analysis is to help identify uncertainty with different components of the East Snake Plain water budget, highlighting areas for measurement improvement, new measurements, et cetera. And so both this project and the reach gains from Blackfoot to Minidoka are projects that the Department of Water Resources have worked on for a long time, but there's been a highlighted need to be able to have a third party participate in this and communicate the results to a wide range of water users. And so engagement and with partners on all of these projects are going to be really important, and we'll talk about that more a little bit later. And then the other project that fell under the East Snake Plain was developing a groundwater surface water budget for the Upper Snake. And so for each of these projects, I'll give some more details for some projects that kind of need a little bit more explanation, and some I'll give just a high-level summary. And we'll be sharing a link to our online interface where you can read more about the details of the project submission and learn more about each of the projects there as well. So the other focus is similar to the East Snake Plain, but focused on the Lower Snake. Or the mid snake, excuse me, it's a typo. So on this project, the priority would be to look at current and historic surface water supplies in the Snake River below Swan Falls Dam and the tributaries to it. And so thinking about what are the trend analyses of unregulated flows at key management points, and how on-stream reservoirs are filling and the change through time. So this is a great example of a project where there's a lot of different partners that'd be really interested in learning about this. The Western Snake River Plain hydrogeologic model is starting to be developed by IDWR this upcoming year. And so this is a great opportunity to kind of integrate into those efforts. The other suite of projects under water scarcity, we grouped under snowpack modeling trends and tools. And so this was really exciting to see. There were a lot of project submissions around snow and snowpack modeling. And so we combined multiple of them into these two projects. One is providing a synthesis on the remote sensing tools for snowpack modeling, including how field observations and advanced modeling techniques are being used, what the state of the art is, where opportunities are in Idaho. And so there are many experts on this topic across the state, and it appears that one of the big challenges is getting that information from the experts out into a broader community of folks that are interested in knowing information about this. So a report is going to be really valuable there. And then the next one is it's called Contextualizing Current Snow Water Storage with Historical Snow and Climate Conditions. So the objective for this project is to develop new interactive online visualizations that support water managers in their decision making. And in the additional details, there's lots of examples of what that might look like. This is a good example of a project where this is a big data synthesis project, but it also will require quite a bit of stakeholder engagement to ensure that the projects or that the products that are coming out of this project are really impactful for water managers. And then the last project under water scarcity and availability is under the theme of like opportunities for adaptive reservoir management across the state. So there were quite a few projects that were submitted where folks were interested in things like forecast informed reservoir operations or evaluating alternative reservoir management opportunities. And through our research advisory committee process, we got input from colleagues at the Bureau of Reclamation that had highlighted that there's already quite a bit of work that's been done on this. And so this first project here in this group would be on synthesizing the existing status on Army Corps of Engineers reports or where the Bureau of Reclamation is with updating management practices on reservoirs across the state. And highlighting opportunities to leverage federal funding from those organizations to do further work in those spaces. And then specifically a case study on Lake Pend Oreille. So there's a lot of interest locally on evaluating how lake level management has changed through time, how that's connected with changes in snowpack and potentially increasing rain on snow and things like that in the future. So from there, we'll move over into water quality, and I'll start with two of the statewide projects that were highlighted. So the first one is regarding groundwater quality and water quality trends across Idaho more generally. And so every year, IDEQ and IDWR collect a lot of really quality data, and there are some efforts right now to start synthesizing this information through time, but this is a great opportunity to engage with those agencies and provide support and data analysis on how water quality trends are changing across the state. And then the next one is one that is exciting. It was brought to us by our colleagues at the USGS, and we will be working to collect data to support a testing data set for evaluating and improving nationwide remote sensing models for chlorophyll and turbidity using Sentinel-2 data. And then this next group of projects, I brought them up all at the same time because they're all kind of interrelated, is really focused in on water quality of recharge and recycled water. And I'll just read this quote from one of our RAC members at the bottom. These are critical projects because we currently lack both the technical and policy tools to manage groundwater quality with expanded aquifer recharge across the state. And so these three projects are kind of three different ways to kind of come at the same topic. The first one being a sensitive aquifer recharge area toolbox. And so this idea is kind of like a GIS platform that would facilitate identification of priority protection areas to improve groundwater quality, aquifer recharge, and other groundwater management objectives. One of the things that we've highlighted here is that there's a potential to focus as a scoping project this year to determine the specific needs of various stakeholders. The next project is on managed aquifer recharge and injection wells. And so there's a lot of questions, particularly in southern Idaho, but across the state, on how injected water should be treated for contaminants at the injection point, how the injection well is considers community source water protection plans or other groundwater models with transport. And then, so given those questions, the project here is proposing to summarize existing approaches to quantify the impact of managed aquifer recharge through injection wells, evaluation of current requirements across organizations, perhaps even an opportunity to look at best practices from other states. And the goal for this includes having deliverables that are relevant for a broad audience, such as our legislatures and decision makers that need to understand kind of the context when they are putting in new policies around managed aquifer recharge. And then the last project, similar to both of the above, and it's focused in on recycled water and aquifer recharge and sensitive resource aquifers. And so asking the questions around what conditions can recycled water be used for groundwater recharge while protecting groundwater for use as drinking water. And there's a cool opportunity here, I think, to highlight existing and ongoing projects in Idaho for case studies. So Nampa, the city of Nampa has a really great recycled water project that is also supporting irrigation downstream irrigation needs, and Boise has been doing some initial stages to evaluating recycled options or recycled water options, and have also engaged the community in the process and have done some testing as well. All right, so then moving over into water technology and innovation, this, like I mentioned earlier, some of these projects are focused on the data side of things. And so this first project is assessing contemporary capabilities and needs in weather and climate monitoring for water resource management and research. And so the goal for this project is to characterize the extent of Idaho's current weather and climate monitoring network through the lens of supporting water resource management and research. So assessing the degree to which our existing monitoring meet our needs, and then identifying gaps and opportunities to expand monitoring coverage throughout the state. So there's some really great examples of how this has been beneficial in other states. In Montana, they have a really large mesonet that was funded, federally funded. And so this would kind of be laying the groundwork to thinking about how do we bring more funding in to expand monitoring in Idaho. And then another one that is really exciting is focused in on quantifying incidental recharge from canals using real-time sensors. So this is a piece of data that is really challenging to get to because of the time it takes to go and take these, reach, gain, and loss measurements across really broad areas. So this project would be looking on how you actually use real-time sensors to quantify this incidental recharge to hopefully decrease the uncertainty in that component of water budgets. All right, so then the last, well, not quite. We have a couple more, and then we'll give you guys some updates on the process and have time for questions. So water policy management and planning, the top project that came out of this theme was climate resilience planning. And so the proposed project was to evaluate the plans that have been created in the state and begin developing a resilience plan for across the state. So this project is something that could take many years. And so a first step was articulated to evaluate the current plans in the region, compare with the climate impacts assessment, and report on key shared vulnerabilities and actions that could be taken. And some, the nice thing about a project like this as a first step is that it could really leverage a lot of the other projects that we are talking about funding this upcoming year, including the primary project under water hazards, which is to model the frequency of high flows under future climate and flood-prone communities. And so this would be a statewide analysis with a focus on communities that have historically experienced flooding as kind of like case studies. And there's an opportunity to do that in kind of the north central part of the state. The thing that is also an exciting opportunity here is that, our state emergency management group does work around flooding. We also have funding that comes from the Idaho Water Resources Board to support infrastructure projects in communities that are experiencing flooding. And so this analysis and outcomes would support identification of priority communities for some of those other funding and support resources. All right, so then our last section is on water literacy and workforce development. So big topic, like I mentioned, is just community water resources and water rights education. This topic is really big. And so some of our conversation around this topic is like, what are our real priorities? What audiences are we trying to reach? Who is already engaging with these audiences and how? And this might be a really good opportunity for a working group or engagement with IWRRI on how we kind of think about statewide water education. Beyond that, we also have an existing high school field-based youth water education program called the Confluence Project. The Confluence Project already exists in North Idaho. This past year, we had about 300 or 400 students that presented on their water research projects at the Youth Water Summit. And we are excited to now be expanding that into the southeast part of the state. And so thinking about how we can continue to support expansion of these modular activities for our youth. And then the last one is on watershed function. And so, this kind of encompasses ecosystems, ecosystem processes. And one of the questions that came up within the working group was, what are the effects of river restoration on groundwater recharge? And how can we use the diversity of really valuable data sets to answer questions around what the impacts of stream restoration are? And so to kick this one off, we're actually having a seminar about the topic, about quantifying impacts of restoration for September 2nd. And that's with Colden Baxter from Idaho State University and Sam Carlson with the Clark's Fork Foundation. And so our IWRRI seminars are on Tuesdays at 11:30 Mountain, 10:30 Pacific. It's online and available to anybody that would like to participate. And it's a great opportunity to discuss best practices with our larger water resources community. All right, so from there, we'll go into, what are the next steps? So first is actually funding the high level of, the biggest Idaho water research priorities. So we are going to be distributing a request for proposals from Idaho faculty. That RFP is going to be launched this week. And on Friday, we are going to be reviewing the RFP and have a question and answer at 11 a.m. Mountain. The letters of interest for that RFP are due September 5th. And after we receive all of the submissions, we are going to review the proposals and then submit our suggestions on projects to fund to the executive board, who will be approving those projects in mid-September. Once we get that approval from the executive board, we are then going to be working with the faculty and partners to refine the specific statements of work. So the letter of interest is just a mechanism for faculty to say, this is a topic I'm interested in. I have the skills necessary to implement the work. And then IWRRI's role is to really facilitate engagement with the partners and stakeholders that have submitted those ideas, help make sure that we've identified who all is working on those topics across the state, to make sure that there's not duplicative efforts, and to make sure that the deliverables of the statements of work are really relevant for the communities that are in need of them. And then beyond that is a continuation of our research advisory committee process. So this was a really cool opportunity for us this year to think about water research priorities across the state, across all these different thematic areas. And we know that, we haven't captured everything. And so we will be continuing to be thinking about how we have additional opportunities for partnerships. If being involved in IWRRI and thinking about research priorities is something that you or your organization is interested in, be happy to have you reach out to me or Meg. And then beyond that, we're starting to think this year necessarily we had a short time frame to get funding out, but we want to start thinking about how we approach phased and multi-year projects. Many of these projects are really complex. They are unlikely to be finished in 1 year, every single project. And so how can we actually support that through IWRRI? And then next spring, we'll be working on the 2026 water research priorities for the state. And we'll be, providing announcements about this process through our newsletter. This one in particular will come out in our spring newsletter, and folks can add research topics to that list. On our website, you can go to our landing page. There's a subscribe button to subscribe to our newsletter. We are sending out newsletters about quarterly, so you don't get too much spam in your inbox. But in those newsletters, you'll also find out about some of the highlights on research from our faculty across the state and students, events that are occurring across the state. And if you have anything else that you'd like to highlight, like events or jobs, you can also email us about that as well. So the last thing that I'll leave you all with, I know that there are probably many partners on the phone or on the call that are working on some of these flavors of projects. And so we are looking to find out from you all who is interested in collaborating with faculty this upcoming year on any of these priority projects. So if your organization is already working on a project aligned with these priorities, we want to hear from you. If you have other opportunities for academics to engage with your organizations, we're interested. And then, as always, if you know of external funding to leverage the funding that we're bringing to the table, that's going to be really helpful when we think about how can we make this money go the farthest that we can. So if you use this QR code, and we can also drop the link in the chat, then you can denote which priority project you're interested in and how your organization might be able to engage in the process. Many of the state agencies have been involved with all of the research prioritization process. And so we know many of those folks, but we don't know everybody. So we're always happy to get additional input and interest from folks. And with that, I will go over into kind of our Q&A session.
Okay, Kendra, our first question comes from Frank. Was wondering if students or grad students can also submit their letter of interest for the request for proposals, or if it's restricted to faculty members.
Yeah, so we'll have, for any of these projects, you'll need a faculty PI to submit because of kind of like the institutional requirements. But if there's a project that you're really interested in, I would encourage you to work with your advisor to submit a letter of interest. And, you will, in the process, the faculty will be explicitly putting in CV materials for specific students that would be working on projects. So that's a great way to be engaged as a student. And then there's a couple of questions that we answered in the chat, but if there's any others or input that folks would like to have, happy to get those. And we have a question from Jason on water temperature. And there was a project that I remember seeing coming through, or like kind of a challenge regarding challenges with water temperature temperature requirements and like changing conditions in the state. That one is one of the many that were submitted that didn't get selected as like a priority for this year, but it's certainly one that we're keeping an eye on and we're interested in having more conversations about as well. And then I see one from Kim. So with the Confluence Project in Southeast Idaho, that is being led by Krista Howarth, who is also here on the call. And we are actively, well, we meaning Krista, is actively engaging with teachers across the region and is a great point of contact for that. The LOI is due on September 5th. We pushed it back a couple of days since the RFP isn't coming out on Friday, so we will make sure to update that on the events calendar. Thanks for whoever highlighted that one. And then the new McClure Center report. Let me see if they have it available on their website. Top of my head, but we will be highlighting that report in our newsletter. And so we'll provide a link to it there. And if we can also follow back up with you, Amy, as well, or you can reach out with any of the folks at the McClure Center, and I'm sure that they would be happy to get that to you as well. And for those of you on the call that are faculty, as a reminder, we will have a full faculty meeting on Friday, going over all the details for the RFP and the submission process and answering any questions that you all might have about that process as well then. Caitlin, great question. To what extent does the water scarcity projects address the interaction between water scarcity and water quality? You know, I think of the submissions, the ones that probably highlighted that interaction the most were the ones that were focused on growth across the state. And but I think of the priority projects, there weren't the ones that are probably most relevant are kind of regarding managed aquifer recharge and water quality. And so how are quantity and quality interacting in that space in particular? Meg, did you have any other ones from that, like that kind of show that intersection?
No, I think that there is a lot of overlap on a lot of these projects. That was one thing that was really challenging for us, was to bin them into specific projects or areas. So just kind of an overall theme was that a lot of the projects that were submitted kind of fit in multiple categories.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for participating. You might be receiving 15 minutes back in your day today. And for anybody that would like to stay on, we're happy to stay on and chat about any other questions that you have.